Hey, it's Jeff Sanders, and welcome back to the 5 a.m. Miracle, episode number 476, the personal side of personal growth, or how to fly your flag. Good morning, and welcome to the 5 a.m. Miracle. I am Jeff Sanders, and this is the podcast dedicated to dominating your day before breakfast. My goal is to help you bounce out of bed with enthusiasm, create powerful, lifelong habits, and tackle your grandest goals with extraordinary energy. In the episode this week, I'll break down what it means to optimize personal growth, why living in the shadows demeans your potential, and how to fly your flag from this point forward. Let's get to it. One of the most difficult personal growth challenges in existence is to live authentically to who you are without interference from others. Living true to yourself means making decisions that will almost unequivocally upset people you know, love, and trust. It's going to hurt. At least, that's what we tend to assume. My friend David Hooper, host of Build a Big podcast, talks all the time about flying your flag, standing for something, and spreading a message based on who you are at the core of what you believe and what you want the world to believe about you and how the world could exist based upon your view of life. In other words, it's time for you to get out of the shadows, to fly your flag, to know yourself intimately, and allow that personal growth that you've experienced to shine and to be proud of what that means and how that can benefit others. I have spoken on this podcast for nearly a decade about personal growth. I have talked about it from the angles of personal fitness. I've talked about it from the angle of productivity, of building businesses, going to grad school, all these different possibilities of taking your life to the next level. But there's more to personal growth than checking boxes. There's more to personal growth than running marathons or launching a new business or getting married or having kids or buying a house or whatever check marks in your life, the seasons you want to live through. Right? There's more to personal growth than what we see on the surface. And once you've tapped into the deeper parts of it, the really, truly intimate parts of your person, of who you are, it will change those exterior things that we tend to look at, those resume builders we tend to look at in life. When you can tap into your true self and live in a way that's honestly authentic, that's not some shallow exterior shell, we're not going for that. I'm not a fan of that. I've lived like that quite a bit. And that's why this is such an important topic to me personally, because it's personal to me, and therefore it's personal to you. So let's discuss this. The personal side of personal growth, what it means to fly your flag, what it means to become your own person, what it means to tap into the immense and almost unlimited potential that we all have to become better, awesomer, more fulfilled individuals who are making a bigger difference, not in terms of the global standard of, world peace or something, but more from the personal standard of living out your best self for whatever that happens to mean. Let's begin by defining personal growth itself. What is it? What are we actually talking about here? From my perspective, personal growth or personal development, same thing, is growth itself. It is improvement. It is positive change over time, right? We are getting better. We are not going backwards, if at all possible. Personal growth is better habits. It's better mental and physical health. It's better emotional and social health. It's better relationships, bigger and better goals themselves. For me, especially the last few years, it is challenging previously held beliefs. It is breaking through perceived barriers. Yes, it's living authentically, true to yourself, living your best life, loving yourself for who you are. I didn't include the word love in my definition of personal growth for a long, long time. But the last few years, I've had some personal experiences that have allowed me to really realize that that is such a big piece that I missed. Being a dad was part of that, sure, but love is definitely an element that is at the core of all of this. That if you're going to grow, well, you have to first love who you are now. And loving who you are now means loving yourself authentically to who you actually are in full, right? The good parts, the weird parts, the quirky parts, those parts that you don't want to share online, those parts you don't want to put on Instagram. Loving that part of yourself, that's such an essential first step. That's at the core of being able to then grow, of being able to then move forward. If you don't love yourself right now, in this moment, that's going to be your best opportunity for personal growth that I could possibly imagine. So what is personal growth? It is improvement, and it is love. So now let's shift to the personal side of personal growth. This is the part to me that I think is probably the most challenging. Most of us understand what it means to grow. We understand what it means to check boxes, to go from level 1 to level 2. We know what it means to graduate with the next degree, to get the job promotion, to run that faster marathon time, to write and publish a book, whatever the thing is, these exterior goals that you've set for yourself, those are part of it. So yes, those goals you're going to achieve and set out to do, I am not going to exclude those as part of this conversation because they are part of it. But there is another part, which is the part of it being personal, of it being authentically unique to you. Living your truth, pursuing goals that are yours and not someone else's, for some people is a big, big deal. And I say that mostly because we as people tend to grow up with very strong influences from our environment. Our parents, our friends, our peer group when we're teenagers. I saw an article recently talking about how parents are actually the second most influential part of a person's upbringing. And the most important element, factor that plays into who we become as people is our peer group and our teens. It blew my mind, but it says a lot about who we become. We are factors. We are products of our environment. And if we're going to live our truth, well, we have to somehow parse out who we are as individuals outside of the group, outside of the peers, outside of the family unit, right? Who are we if we stand alone and we're not influenced by others? Now, this in part is kind of the American individualism conversation, which I'm not going to argue that's what we're talking about, whereas we're trying to be self-centered or narcissistic, or we're trying to have personal ego here that says we're trying to achieve things so that I can have the gold medal and the $1 million bank accounts, and this is all about me, me, me. That's not what this is. It's also not an anti-argument to community. This is not saying you're going to ignore your friends and family or try to figure out how to be successful without the village element. One thing I know as a dad of two young girls is that it does take a village to raise children. It does require community to thrive. So none of this conversation is about boosting ego or being anti-community. What this is about is knowing yourself, the true, authentic nature of self-awareness. It's you pursuing goals because they fit who you are, not because someone else told you to, not because you're copying someone else who you think would be good to copy. I say that because that was my life for a long time. My best friend, who later on became the best man at my wedding, was an extraordinarily talented actor, singer, and dancer, and later on went to literally perform on Broadway. He was in Gypsy with Patti LuPone. He was living the New York lifestyle, successful in every way that we had imagined growing up in the theater, which is what I did as a kid in high school, and then I majored in theater in college. My experiences in all of that was my closest friend group. My peers in my teens were primarily performers. They were musicians, they were actors, they were dancers, they were these people who were extraordinarily creatively talented. They were artists in every way. And when I was experiencing this as a young person, right, all of my friends who were uber talented, right, best man at my wedding became a Broadway star, right, that's the kind of competition that I had. So the comparison game for me was extreme. So I'm looking at all these people and asking the question, well, how do I copy my best friend? How do I become like he is? How do I get his skills? How do I sing like him, dance like him? How do I have the opportunities that he has? These were real issues for me growing up. I was living someone else's truth. I was literally auditioning for theater programs because he was. Thinking to myself, well, if he's doing it, then I have to do it too because we're friends. I had no self-identity. I had no sense of what I was trying to do. And if you know me and know this podcast, you know that the very first thing I did after I graduated college was launch a blog called Graduated and Clueless. This is my story. I was lost. Personal growth is important to me because I desperately needed it. My identity as an individual was almost non-existent because I had been playing the copycat game. I had been living someone else's life story. And guess what? That doesn't work. That's not the path forward. You don't discover your best talents and strengths and interests and your value in the world by simply doing what somebody else does because they're doing it in a way that's successful or it looks like something you might want to do. I mean, yes, there's a massive angle of the experimentation that comes from being able to tinker and to find out more about yourself and to take internships and to get those personal real life experiences. I'm all for all of that. And part of life is copying. There's definitely a place in this process for you to do those things. But at the end of the day, you are living your life. The personal side of personal growth is that you know yourself. And you are choosing goals that align to your value, your strengths, your interest, your way to bring about who you are at the highest levels. So on a practical level, of course, those are things like you choosing your own schedule, your calendar, your career, your hobbies, your routines, your habits, even your hairstyles. I grew a beard recently, and it's the longest beard I've ever had in my life, and I am only growing this beard just because I can, right? Because I have always wanted to. It's personal to me, right? I'm doing this for me. Is it attractive? I don't know. Am I going to keep it? I don't know. But I'm going to do it anyway, right? This is part of what it means to tinker with stuff. And it's something as silly as growing a beard. Well, for some guys, that's a staple part of their identity. That's a big deal. It is how they present themselves to the world. So these elements of personal growth sometimes can seem as silly as a haircut or a beard, and yet they can be as intimate and as powerful as displaying your identity to the entire world. So I'm not going to discount personal choices that might seem silly to someone else. In fact, that's exactly the point. This is not about other people. This is not about their perceptions, not about their judgments, not about how you think someone might react if you ... This is just you being you. I experience this kind of a disconnect every single time I get on this microphone and I talk to you on this show. Because what I'm thinking about the entire time, whether it's conscious or not, the entire time I'm thinking, how are you reacting to what I'm saying? How am I presenting this information in a way that's logical, that is helpful, that is entertaining, that is going to capture your attention so you listen all the way through, right? Like these are, of course, this is a typical, podcaster or someone who is creating content. You want the viewer, the listener, the consumer to enjoy the content. But way beyond that, there is this very clear sense of I'm being judged. Now, maybe you're not judging me, and maybe that's all internal, or maybe you are, and I'm correct, but who cares? It doesn't even matter. And this is where we get into this weird mental game when we are putting ourselves on the line. when you're going to hit publish on something, you're going to launch a podcast, you're going to write a book, you're going to be on stage, change your hairstyle, go to a job interview, go meet some new friends, go out into the world. If other people are going to see you, then their potential perceptions and judgments and opinions of you are a part of that experience. And whether we consciously acknowledge that or not, that is part of life, is our interaction with the community. And for me, the personal growth side of all of this is being confident in your own two shoes. Own 2 feet? There's the phrase. Confident in your own 2 feet. I don't know if I'm taking shoes here. So you have that level of confidence that says, this is who I am, right? Take it. Leave it. I don't care. I am proud of who I am. I have loved myself to know that this is me. Now, this is not an argument, once again, to kind of boost your ego in this process. This is not about that, but it is about personal confidence. And those two things kind of pair together, kind of a dangerous line to walk here. But we're talking about you knowing yourself, being proud of yourself, and living in the world in an authentic way. And then once you're at that place where you can just enter into the world, hit publish, be out there, and be willing to take criticism, be willing to take the opinions of others and accept it as feedback, and then you take what you want and you ignore the rest and you move forward anyway. Let me use a good example here of Lizzo, the very popular musical artist who is, I would say, breaking barriers in many ways with the way she performs, the music that she produces, the backup dancers she has at her concerts. I don't know a ton about Lizzo. I'm not going to claim to be knowledgeable about what she is doing. But what I can say is that I know from the very limited perception I have of her is she's living a truth that others are afraid to live. She is doing something with confidence that others are desperately afraid to ever attempt. And that takes guts. It takes a lot of guts. It's risky to live your truth. It is risky to be your best self. It is an absolute risk to tell the world, here I am. Here's my flag. To be able to confidently say, I'm going to put that flag in my front yard and fly that thing and say, this is me. That takes guts. Or you can just simply box yourself in, hide it in a closet, lock the door, and say, my best self is for no one. Not even for me. That's when things get dangerous. That's when you're living what I think Steven Pressfield does a good job of describing as life in the shadows. Steven Pressfield is one of my favorite authors, and he talks a lot about this concept. The book, The War of Art, does a really good job of breaking down his thoughts on this, but I think one of the angles he discusses is the shadow career. And the shadow career means you're basically working in the industry that you want to, but without taking the risk of doing the thing you set out to do, the thing you actually want to do. A simple example would be, let's imagine you want to be a Broadway actor, but you don't have the confidence to actually audition for a show. You don't have, the risk-taking personal side of you to say, I'm going to actually directly try. And so because of that, I'm just going to work in entertainment. I'm just going to work in some side hustle angle over here, but I'm never going to actually push the button and pull the lever and live my authentic life. I'm going to hide from it, right? Life in the shadows is this dark, lonely, scary, fake lie. That's not where personal growth thrives. That's where it dies. If you live in a dark, lonely, scary, fake lie of a life, in the shadows, you have a big opportunity to come out and actually live your life. Which brings me to this point about flying your flag, which is living your truth. It is embracing your identity. In some cases, that might mean doing things that scare you. When you stand for something meaningful, there is risk associated. When you're going to fight against mediocrity or sameness, or just the very stereotypical societal norms that could be boring or muted or lifeless, right? That status quo that just doesn't work for you. If your truth is something other than the status quo, which it probably is, you're going to experience that sense of tension and fear when you decide to break out of that. Now, in this process, you don't have to be loud about who you are. You don't actually need a flag to display who you are. The goal here is oneness with yourself, which could be a quiet thing, but powerful to you. Right? This could be a silent journey, but one that has a profound impact on your future choices. Right? So being loud about this isn't required. If that fits who you are, that's great, but that's not necessarily a component here. The other piece of this, to fly your flag, is that you can do this with other people. You can find other people who share similar stories, learn from what they've been through, listen from those people, and then be able to have that speak truth into your own truth. I'm using the word truth a lot here, but basically saying, allowing yourself to be positively influenced by others who are on a similar journey and allowing their personal growth to then carry over into your own, which is not the same thing as copying. That's not the same thing as living someone else's story. It's saying we're going to listen to other people's stories and that community aspect of we all can grow together. A rising tide floats all boats. That's where that angle really comes in and shines. To give a really profound, distinct example for what all of this can be, there is a TV show on HBO called We're Here, which my wife and I are obsessed with. It has become an absolute standard in our household. I don't discuss TV shows hardly ever in this podcast, but this is one that it fits this conversation so well, it would be impossible not to discuss it. So what We're Here is literally a group of drag queens who goes into these small towns and allows people to tell their stories and ultimately do a drag show. And I know there are a lot of opinions about drag shows. I know there are a lot of opinions about what this all can mean. And I don't discuss politics on this show. I don't discuss news. But what I am going to discuss here is the beauty of what this show really highlights, which is that people are changing from the inside out, and they are, in this case, literally flying their flag that represents who they are, who they're becoming, who they want to be, because they've experienced oppression. They've experienced that literal sense of living in a closet, which no one wants. No one wants to live a fake life. No one wants to hide themselves when they have the opportunity to not do that, when they have the chance to live a beautiful, true life. If you have not seen We're Here, I recommend it very much so. It's a phenomenal show. It will make you cry. It will make you feel emotions you've never felt before. It's an amazing, amazing show. But beyond that, I want you to experience that same sense of openness, that same sense of a release, that same sense of, man, I can just be me, right? I can just be me. Because that's where this process starts, is to love yourself. This is a RuPaul quote, right? Love yourself. This is huge because that's what leads to you being able to then make those next forward steps. So if you have felt pressure in your life to, let's say, for example, follow in your parents' career path when you don't want to do that, or you have felt pressure to eat a certain diet. I bucked that trend 12 years ago when I went vegan. Talk about trying to fight against societal norms. I deal with that every day, and I chose that. I wasn't born a vegan. I chose to do that. I have chosen to fight against societal standards that I don't agree with, right? If you have felt the pressure from these types of things, you know what it means to say, I'm going to be me. I'm going to do this because this matters to me. When you're able to stand on that kind of a pedestal and say, this is the real me. Yes, it feels scary. Yes, it can be exhausting, but it's also so liberating because then you don't have to question whether you've done your part in this story, because you have. You've, in some cases, flown your flag to say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is valuable to me. And accept the risk that comes with it. Accept the risk that life by itself is a risk. You are going to experience risk if you choose not to do any of these things. The risk of being boxed in versus the risk of what might happen if you decide to unbox yourself. It's all going to be there. The risk isn't going away. It's just a question of which path do you want to choose. Do you want to live the lie, or do you want to live life on your own terms? Embracing risk and fear is part of the journey, but it is the better journey to take. So, I want to invite you now to fly your flag, to plant that flag, to begin that journey, to experience personal growth on a higher level. And yeah, be your best self in your own way. If you want to email me and share your story, I'd be so happy to hear about that. Jeff@jeffsanders.com. Feel free to reach out with questions. I know this episode this week was a little different than what I've normally done, but hey, guess what? That's part of my journey too, of experimentally, artistically challenging myself to take on new topics is a huge reason why I'm a podcaster to begin with. And so this is part of my story. If you've heard this podcast over the years, you've heard a lot of my story, and you know a lot of who I am because I freely share a lot of that. And I feel the need to do so because for me, this is a public journal. This is me being able to get things off my chest, to say things out loud that I've maybe only thought in my head. And it has become essential for me as a therapeutic means to improve my own mental health. And if you also want that same experience, launch a podcast, I guess. Do something that's going to help you feel better. But yes, take those experiments, embrace your own personal growth, be your own person. And for the action step this week, you guessed it, fly your flag. If you've been living in the shadows, it's time to come out. If you've been scared to live your authentic truth, it's time to share your story. If you've been following someone else's dream, it's time to clarify your vision for your life. You've only got one chance to make this life amazing. So let's lean in. Let's live it fully, proudly, and beautifully. JeffSanders.com/476 is the place to go for the episode notes. And of course, subscribe to this podcast or follow in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also go to JeffSanders.com/subscribe to see a whole bunch of apps available where you can tune in to this podcast. That's all I've got for you here on the 5 a.m. Miracle Podcast this week. Until next time, you have the power to change your life and fly your flag, and the fun begins bright and early.